Welcome to this very important episode about lumbar spinal fusion surgery. If you are at all considering this procedure or have already had it, then this video is extremely important for you to watch. I'm going to share lots of evidence that will really clarify the ineffectiveness of lumbar spinal fusion. And I'll explain the real reason fusion has so many problems. And then I'll tell you what you can do to heal your back pain quickly and easily. That's all you want, isn't it? Very often, spine surgeons point to common findings on an MRI, like herniated, bulging, or prolapse discs for our friends in the UK, and they recommend lumbar spinal fusion surgery as the best option. But there are lots of problems with this very common procedure, in which the invertebral disc is removed and adjacent vertebrae are connected with cages, screws, plates, rods, and other medieval-sounding type devices. Now, the first red flag is that studies show that lumbar fusion succeeds in less than 40% of patients. That's very low, in my opinion. And in this context, the word success doesn't really mean much either. In one study done 2 years after spinal fusion in patients identified with successful procedures, their pain had been reduced by barely half, and most patients were continuing to use painkillers. That doesn't sound very successful to me. In another study, also conducted 2 years post-fusion surgery, 35% of patients reported that their pain was the same as before the surgery, and 15% said that it was worse than before. So you've got this very invasive and risky procedure where they have to go in through the front of the body, not the back, and move organs aside to do the surgery. And according to this study, 50% of the patients were the same or worse off than before. And back fusion surgery is known for having lots of complications, and the recovery period can be as long as 6 months to an entire year. In a confidential interview done in 2009, one spine surgeon explained that while he could clearly see the disc anomaly on the MRI, he could not, with any certainty, determine the source of the patient's back pain. He said that's why 10 surgeons can look at the same MRI and propose 10 different solutions for the same patient. He went on to say that the ambiguity created by the MRI makes it possible for surgeons to do practically anything they want. And here's the kicker. Guess what spine surgeons don't want under any circumstances? What they don't want is to get lumbar spinal fusion surgery themselves. In fact, in 2010, at an American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons conference, 200 surgeons were polled as to whether they'd ever have spinal lumbar fusion surgery themselves for lower back pain. All but one said absolutely not. Apparently, the risk was too high for them, and who would know better? And I can see why. Because about 1 in 5 patients who undergo fusion surgery return for a second surgery to fix the first one. And here's a really important point. Even when the fusion procedure is done perfectly, meaning that on an x-ray the vertebrae have grown together and the hardware is positioned correctly, the fusion itself imposes increased pressure on the surrounding vertebral segments because they're not as strong as the artificial metal parts. This can end up resulting in what they call adjacent disc deterioration. That's a condition where the vertebrae above or below the fused vertebrae start deteriorating because of the fusion. In these cases, a second surgery has a 30% chance of success, and that drops to 15% for the third procedure and down to a dismal 5% for the fourth. But despite these risks and poor outcomes, the number of spinal fusions performed in the United States grew from 67,000 in 1997 to over 500,000 in 2022. More than a 600% increase. The U.S. accounts for more than 65% of all spinal fusion surgeries in the world, even though we account for just 4.2% of the world's population. In the UK and other European countries, fusion surgery is rarely performed. So we must just have really bad genetics in the U.S., huh? So what's going on here? Well, let's look at a clinical study from the New England Journal of Medicine published in 2011. I think this will help you understand the problem with fusion surgery and all back surgery for that matter. This was a study of almost 200 asymptomatic test subjects who were completely pain-free and had never had any back pain. Asymptomatic just means that they had no symptoms. In this clinical study, they did an MRI of each one of these patients' backs. Now, since these people had never had back pain, you would expect the MRIs to come back completely or mostly clear, wouldn't you? Well, that's not what happened. 70% had disc abnormalities for which surgery might be recommended. 52% had bulging discs. 27% had at least one herniated disc, and 65% had degenerative disc disease for which lumbar spinal fusion is commonly recommended. So the result of this study was that 70% of people without back pain had disc abnormalities. Now, if you showed these MRIs to a spine surgeon, he would think 70% of them needed surgery, even though nobody had back pain. So maybe this is the real problem with lumbar fusion surgery. Maybe it's not the procedure that goes wrong. Maybe the diagnosis is wrong from the get-go. Maybe they didn't need the surgery in the first place. As one honest surgeon said, everyone has disc abnormalities. They are completely normal. Okay, are you ready? You're not going to believe this, but hang with me for a minute. All that back pain is just a function of too much stress and too much cortisol. That's all. There's a medical diagnosis for back pain that doctors are not allowed to use because it's not profitable. And it's called tension myositis syndrome, or TMS for short. Myositis just means muscle inflammation, so the diagnosis literally means that emotional tension causes muscle inflammation, often in the lower back. And when you think about it, stress causing back pain isn't that hard to believe. In fact, in 2017, a firm called Statistica surveyed over 5,000 chronic back pain sufferers. And they asked them what they thought was causing their back pain. And the number one answer was stress. And this is great news because it means that you won't be setting off the metal detector at the airport. I'm Laura Thornton, co-founder of CalmYourBack.com, where we have a non-medical approach to help people just like you cure stress-based back pain. This is the method that I use to cure my own back pain. You can check it out and watch a free 6-minute workshop that explains our unique 3-step healing process. You can find the free workshop at CalmYourBack.com, and there's a link below this video. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.